Welcome back to another Super Unreal Power tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at how to make your character duplicate and multiply like Multiple Man. But first I wanted to preface this with a couple of things. Now, when I was coming up with ideas on how to do this power, my first thought was to find some kind of a way to actually duplicate the character in-game, and nothing was really coming. So then another idea came to me. Well, why not just create a child of the primary character and then spawn that character in-game instead? Because it's going to have the same exact attributes as the playable character anyway. And I was like, you know what? That's how we're going to do it. Now that also reminds me of a game design concept that I've kind of been seeing a lot lately, where video game design isn't about completely copying something in real life as much as it's about making something look like it's what happens in real life. And with that mindset, it's kind of a little bit easier to come to solutions for mechanics like this. And the second thing I wanted to say is that this power came highly requested, and I've seen requests for it in I think every video that I've created so far. So I kind of thought this would be a pretty fun one for you guys. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. And now let's check out how the power works. Okay. I didn't add any new functionality to the game besides that punch attack, which I'll explain here in a second. Now here we'll hit the C key and it will duplicate, create the clones, and they're going to run to a random location here. Right now I also implemented a limit to the number of clones, and right now it's 10. And then with that punch attack, I've used that so we can finish off some of these clones, and it'll let us clone a few more. But that's how it works. Alright, let's open up a new Unreal project. Okay, now I'm going to be building this in Unreal 4.25, so let's crack one of those open. Okay, now from here we're going to go to Games, and we're going to create this in the third person template here. And let's change the name of the project to something like Duplication Power, and then create the project. And that should be just a moment. Okay, here we go. Inside the content browser, the first thing that we're going to do is create a new folder. And we're just going to call this Duplication Power again. Now we're going to have to add a new input here. So we'll go up to our edit window and we'll go to our project settings. Let's go to inputs and a new action mapping. And then we're just going to name this one, let's call it clone, actually, because the D key is obviously taken up by movement. So this way we'll just set this to the C key and it'll be relatively easy to remember. Let's see, where'd we go? C key. Alright. And then just in case you're using a controller, why don't we add one more input mapping for that. Go to the gamepad, and then let's do face button left. And then we'll close out of our project settings. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our third person character here, which will be in the third person BP folder under blueprints. We're instead going to duplicate this, and we're just going to call this BP underscore, we'll just call this Multiple Man. And then let's move him over into our duplication power folder. So go ahead and hit move, open this up. Alright, and then we're going to duplicate our third person character. And we're just going to call this BP underscore prime character. Now let's move him over to our duplication power folder. And we'll go back to that folder. And here we're going to duplicate this. Or excuse me, we're not going to duplicate it. We're going to create a child of it this time. How this is going to work again is we're going to spawn the child character every time we hit the clone key or the C key. And that's how our duplication is going to work. And then this child blueprint is going to just inherit all the attributes of our prime character. So let's just call this BP underscore, let's make it just clone. It'll be easy to remember. Okay, now let's jump right into it. Most of our work is going to be done in our prime character here. So let's open that up real quick. And we don't need to make any changes to any of the default programming here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to slide down to the bottom. And let's bring in that input action that we just added. And put action clone here. And right off the bat, we're going to drag off of pressed. And we are going to spawn actor from class. Whoops, that's not how you spell it. Slide him to the right a little bit. And for the class, we're going to change that to our clone character. Now we need to get a location for this character to spawn from. As a default, I believe it's going to put it right in the middle of the map at 0, 0, 0 on the coordinates, but we want to adjust that a little bit. So what we're going to do is, we're going to grab our capsule component here. We're going to drag off and get a world transform. Now we're going to split the return value, and then we're going to split the return location. And now we're going to drag off of the X, and we are going to put in a plus node, float plus float, and we're going to put in a negative 300, so we'll put the clones about 300 Unreal units behind us. Now of course, if you wanted them to spawn in front of you, or to the side, or even to a random location, you could also throw that in around here too. It would take a little bit of different work, but for sake of simplicity, we're just going to keep it like this. Next we need to get a make vector node, and then we're going to plug in the Y and the Z, and now in our spawn actor we're going to split the transform here, and we're going to plug this in for our spawn transform location. Now before we can test, we need to go back to our third person example map. Let's go to our world settings, and we're going to just change the game mode just to the third person game mode. Let's change the default pawn class to our prime character. We'll delete this guy because we just don't need him in the map. And then we'll save, and then we're going to hit play. Now, obviously we've got our guy here, and he spawned at a different zone, which kind of is a hint that we did the right thing here. Now we'll hit C, and it spawned our guy. Alright, looking back at our character, we actually don't need the transform. We can just go with the world location instead, because we're not actually using the rotation or scale. So we're good to go there. But another thing to make note of is that when we're cloning, we can actually basically clone an infinite amount. Now it'll only clone up to 9 in your current location, but as soon as you move, it'll start putting more in as long as nobody is in the way. Now, we can run into some obvious problems with that, whereas we're spawning, a million actors and then it crashes your game. So, in order to avoid that, or also just keep within your game world rules, we're going to set a limit to how many actors you can spawn. But just for fun, let's go into our clone here, and we're going to add an explosion whenever he spawns. So we'll drag off of event begin play, and we're going to spawn an emitter at location, and we're just going to set this to the explosion. Now if you wanted to do any other kind of effect on spawn, like maybe you want them to crawl out of the ground, or maybe you wanted them to kind of do some kind of a funny animation when they appear, this is where you could do that. So off of the location, we're going to get a reference tool self, get our actor location, and we're just going to plug that into our location. And now whenever these guys spawn, right where they spawn, it's going to create this explosion thing, so it'll look kind of cool. It'll also kind of just help us signify that something's happening. Alright, back to okay, so let's go into our prime character. Now the first thing that we need to do is add a couple variables here, so let's do that. The first one we're going to call max num of clones, and then we're going to change this to an integer because we want exact numbers for clones. We don't need halves of them or pieces of them, so integers will work just fine here. Alright, so let's right click and duplicate this, and we are going to call this one current number of clones. And then we're going to compile, and for the max we want to change the default value. Let's just make it 5. Oops, not 50, just 5 for now. And let's slide our spawn actor node over a little bit, and we're going to drag off and bring in a branch. Now from the condition, let's drag off and we're going to type in, we want to get an equal integer. And now we're going to drag in our max number of clones and plug that in, and then our current number of clones and plug that in. And now we need to add to the current number of clones whenever we spawn. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag that guy in, we're going to get it, and we are going to add a plus node and do an integer plus an integer. And let's drag our current number again. If you hold Alt, you will actually automatically bring in a set node. So we're going to plug that in. And now at the end of this, it's going to take our number of clones, it's going to add that to 1, and then it's going to set that as our number of clones. Just for debugging and game breaking purposes, we're going to drag off of the execute arrow here, and we are going to put in an isValid node, so we can make sure that we actually have a valid spawnable actor here. So we're going to plug that into the input object, and we're going to make sure that this will only add, or if the spawned actor is a valid actor, a valid clone actor. Okay, and now so we can see what's going on here, let's drag off and put in a print string, and we are going to plug the current number of clones into the string value. So every time this number is updated, we'll be able to see what's going on. You could plug this into a widget, but for sake of time, we're going to skip that part. Okay, just go back just real quick. Alright, so this is checking if this is equal, and if it's true that that's equal, then it's going to spawn. We want that to actually do the opposite, so we're actually going to move this to false. So if it's not correct that the two are equal, if that our current number of clones is equal to our max number of clones, it'll spawn. So now that we've done this, we can compile and we'll save, and we're going to test that value one more time here. So we're going to hit C, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and now I'm going to keep hitting it. It's not letting me create any more than 5 clones. So it looks like our clone limit is actually working as needed. So let's escape out of that. Alright, we're going to add, so when these clones die, it'll actually decrease from our number of clones and then let us actually clone more. But in order to do that, I think the funnest way to do that is just let's make a punch animation or a punch attack so that we can hit these clones and then make them die, and then we can create new ones. I figured that's a lot funner than just making a simple line trace, and if they connect, then they die. So that's what we're going to do here. So the first thing that we need to do is actually go into our, go back into our project settings, and we're going to add another input action for a punch attack. So let's add one more there. Let's just call this, let's call it punch attack. And then let's just set this to the F key. And then for a controller, a gamepad, let's see, I think the B button on an Xbox controller is very often melee right. At least it was in some of the Halos. So let's go with that. Gamepad face button right. Or you can change it to whatever you want, but that's what I'll go with for now. We'll close out of this. And now in order to do this punch, we're going to need some nice animations here. It doesn't have to be too flashy. I'm just going to use a punch from an asset pack that I own. And you can use just whatever punch animation you like. So bear with me here. I'm going to add that animation pack and then grab those punches. Alright, now that we have our animations, let's create a new folder again, and we're just going to call this animations. And let's get both of our animations and bring them into that folder just to keep things tidy. Go into our animation folder. Now currently these animations are only set to the skeleton that they came with. We need to make sure that our skeleton, that these animations work with our skeleton. So let's go to our skeleton. I find that an easy way to do that is just to go into your blueprint and select it. We need to go to our skeleton, and we need to select our humanoid rig here. And then we'll save. We'll close out of that. We don't need those anymore. And then let's grab one of these animations and then go to the skeleton on the animation. Looks like that one's already set for the humanoid rig. This asset pack may or may not be using the same skeleton already. I'm not 100% sure. But just in case you guys might not be, I'll show you what we do instead. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to retarget our animation asset here. duplicate animation assets and retarget, and then we're going to select this new skeleton, and we're going to hit retarget. So let's change this to just punch. Okay, now we'll move that into our animation folder. We'll go back in and let's do the same thing with our death animation real quick. Right click, retarget anim asset, duplicate, select our skeleton, retarget, and let's just let's rename this just to dead or death. That'll be nice. That'll be, well, I don't know if you could say nicer, but it'll fit better for what we're doing. Okay, let's move that back into our animations folder. Now let's go back, and for the punch attack, we're going to need this to be a montage, because what we're going to do is we're going to call this inside our prime character. We're going to create a punch function, and from that function we are going to tell it to do this animation. So we need to right click on it, and we need to create, and then create anim montage, and then we don't need to change the name, it's just going to be punch montage, and we should be all set from there. Back in our prime character, we're going to scroll down a little bit, and we're going to right click, and we're going to put input action, and just type in punch, and it should get our action event. Now one of the things that we want to do just for future proofing is we want to make it so our clone will be able to do this too, because sure, later on down the road you guys are going to want your clones to be able to do the same actions that your prime character does. Otherwise, you know, we kind of don't necessarily have a clone, we just are creating somebody else to do random things. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to set this as a custom event, and from that custom event we're going to plug that into our input action, and then we can call our custom punch attack from our prime character with the input action, and also in our clones, like maybe from our AI blueprint or something if we want to do that. Let's right click, put in custom event. Let's name this just punch attack will be fine. And then we're going to drag off of pressed, and we're going to type in punch attack, and now it is calling this function. But now let's define what that actually does. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do actually is we're going to get our mesh, we're going to get our anim instance, and then we from the return value from the anim instance we're going to get montage play. We'll plug that in from our executable, and the montage that we want to play is going to be our punch. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a sphere trace by channel. I kind of prefer that to the line trace just because the sphere kind of makes it easier to hit. Otherwise you have to be extremely precise with the line trace with a melee attack like this. And just for the sake of what we're doing, I think it'll be a whole lot easier. So let's drag off and type in sphere trace by channel. We're gonna drag that off a little bit because we need to tell it where to spawn, or we need to tell it the start and end points. And for those start and end points, we're gonna get our capsule component here. And from this capsule component, we're gonna get the world location from our capsule component. Let's get a plus node here. And we're gonna type in 45 for the Z axis. And we're gonna plug this into our start. Okay, next we need to get actor rotation, and we need to get our forward vector. I need to add a multiply, or bring in a multiply node here, float vector times a float. Let's type in 300. Now we also are going to need a plus node, so we're going to grab our get world location here, and we're going to put in a plus, vector times vector. We're going to plug our forward vector value in here, and then we're going to plug that in for our end location. Now what we're doing here is we're getting our rotation, we're making sure that it's just the forward vector where we're directly facing, and then we're going to multiply that value times 300, so we're going to look 300 Unreal units out, which is I think 300 centimeters. Maybe a little long, but we're just going to go with that for our punch. It'll just make everything a little bit easier. Now our start point is going to be just our capsule component, but a few degrees up, and then our end point is going to be our location plus 300 units out. Now we're going to have to change our radius a little bit, and this is just going to expand the volume that a targeted actor has to fall into in order to define whether we hit them or not. So we're just going to set that as, let's do 25. And then we also need to do our trace channel and set that for camera. And lastly, we want this to ignore ourself, so we're going to drag off of this, and we are going to get all child actors. Whoops, messed up there. And we're going to plug this in, and this is kind of future-proofing it for multiplayer. So this might not be necessary for your game, but we don't want this to include the descendants here. Alright, next we need to take the hit variable and we need to break it. Oops, not a for each loop. Oh, we're in multi-sphere trace by channel. Whoops. Okay, so we need to get a sphere trace by channel that's not multi. Okay, just a regular sphere trace by channel here. And we are going to plug everything into that instead. That's what was funny there. So I'm going to remove this. We will need to change the trace to camera again real quick. Alright, now off of the out hit we're going to break that hit result. Bring this down a little bit. Now from the return value, let's drag off and we're going to type in a branch. We want to make sure that we're actually hitting a target with this. Now for the damage that we're dealing, let's bring in a apply damage node. Let's plug the true executable into the apply damage one. For the hit actor, we're going to plug that in as the damaged actor. The instigator is going to be, or the damage causer is going to be self, so let's get a reference to self for that. And for damage, I like to promote the base damage to variables so we can edit that. Let's just do base damage, or let's do punch damage so we can be more specific. Let's compile, and now we're going to set that punch damage to 10. And now here you could also plug in a sound effect or a hit noise. So what you would do is we'll drag off of the executable. We're going to get play sound at location. And for the location, we're going to grab the location from our hit result and plug that in. Now the sound, again, you could promote it to a variable or you could select what we have. We don't have any good punch sounds in the project currently, so once again, I'm going to bring in a sound from an asset pack that I have, but you could use whatever sounds that you have. Specifics don't really matter. So I imported my sounds. I'm going to select the one that I just imported. It should be just impact punch here. Now I'm going to compile. Alright, now before our punch is going to work, we're going to have to edit our animation graph just a little bit. Let's select our mesh here. And we need to find our animation blueprint, so we'll hit the little magnifying glass to take us there. And we've got it right here. I'm going to open that. We don't need to change anything here yet. We're going to take our default state machine here, and we're going to break that. Because what we're going to have to do next is we're going to have to blend between our default slot. And what that does is it's going to make it so our punch will actually hit without standing still and then us still moving forward. And then, so what we're going to do is, since we've broken off our state machine here, we're going to drag here, and then we are going to type in new saved cached pose. And now we're saving basically we're saving a little slot for our default locomotion. Now we're going to right click here and we're going to put in a layered blend per bone. And so what this does is it's going to blend between our state machine and then our default slot, which is what we're going to have to use to get this to work. So we're going to drag off of this and type in add default slot. Let's plug that into our output. Now we're going to get our saved pose. So type in saved, use cached save pose, plug that directly into the base pose. And now we're going to copy this and we're going to add this to our default slot and then plug that into our blend pose here. Now if you also had, if you're blending between an upper body slot, you would also plug that in here instead. So we should be all set from there. And now we should be able to punch. So let's test that out. Now we can punch like we normally would. But if we do our clone here and we punch him, it does the sound, and we're actually connecting and we're hitting, but it's not doing anything. He's not dying. So the next thing that we need to do is create the functionality for our clones to die. Now, I've noticed that this video has gotten pretty long, so let's take a break here and then we'll finish off in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in part 2 of the duplication ability.